Hi everyone, thank you for coming, those of you in person here and online. Thank you for joining us today. Our speaker today is Oleksandra Keudel. She's an associate professor at Kyiv School of Economics and an associate at the Harvard Ukraine Research Institute. Oleksandra researches democratic transformation and societal resilience, specializing in Ukraine's local governance and subnational politics. She has a PhD in political science from Freie University Berlin, and has been a visiting researcher at a few wonderful US institutions, including NYU and also George Washington University and Soderborn University. Her book, How Patronal Networks Shape Opportunities for Local Citizen Participation in a Hybrid Regime, includes comparative analysis of 5 cities in Ukraine and was published with Ibidem Columbia University Press in 2022, and I highly recommend it. So today, Oleksandra is going to be talking about societal resilience and polycentric governance and learning from Ukrainian local communities' response to the full-scale Russian invasion. So thank you very much. Oleksandra, take it away when you're ready.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Emma. Thanks a lot for having me here. And I will go and stand now, be able to click my presentation. So it is my pleasure to be here again. Indeed, I have been to NYU, and it's a great place to share my research results. And I will have a bit of a half an hour-ish presentation, and then we can do the questions from the audience or some discussion. So to give you a bit of a context, today I will be presenting the research results of a project which we have done at the Kyiv School of Economics together with a team. You see everyone here on the slides. And we have researched, and this is a research that has been made possible with the Swedish International Center for Local Democracy. This is our long-term partner. We start with the observation that in 2022 and onwards, once Russia has invaded Ukraine, the whole territory of it, the local authorities have been very much engaged in dealing with all kinds of repercussions of the invasion. We call them war-related crises. Here you see on this picture is a case of communal workers who are cleaning the streets after the missile attack on Odessa, which happened on March 16, 2024. However, such pictures are quite common, and not to mention that Ukrainian local authorities are engaging in all kinds of dealing with repercussions of the war, with internal displacement, with the energy crisis, because basically Russia hits the energy infrastructure, so they constantly have to adapt, adjust to find new energy sources. And so while, of course, the defense is on the side of the state, the armed forces of Ukraine, and of course the state is also doing a lot in order to sustain the energy infrastructure and other important infrastructures at the local level in the communities. That's actually Ukrainian local self-government that comes into play. And so this study is focusing empirically on the local self-government. However, it has a larger theoretical puzzle from which it departs. Basically, we already know from crisis management literature that polycentric institutions are actually good for crisis response. There are many reasons for that. So you can see here the knowledge. We know that large-scale crises, they need a network of responders because of a lot of things happening simultaneously, maybe on different levels. We also know that having multiple levels dealing with any crisis, and also having these kind of decision centers that are more or less autonomously dealing with the crisis at the local level, helps to respond more adaptively at appropriate levels. So without this unnecessary going back and forth between on the vertical line of governance. Plus, another argument is that citizens are closer to the authorities at the local level, and they can assist basically in doing crisis response. But interestingly, if you look at the crisis management literature, there is a lot about inter-organizational communication, coordination, cooperation, collaboration, all the so-called 4 Cs of crisis response. The agencies, the state agencies or local agencies and non-state organized stakeholders, I don't know, business associations, NGOs and so on, they are always in the focus of this. And basically the argument about polycentricity is usually driven from the idea that all these network of responders, these different organizations are going to drive their resources and respond. But this literature only treats citizens and other, let's call them unorganized stakeholders, in terms of self-sufficient. So the main argument is that, oh, we need communities to be self-sufficient, to set up storage of food, stocks of food, water, and whatever, so that they could hang on until the tasked specialized forces come. And here we see the gaps, because actually, what about other roles for citizens? What about other roles? What about any roles for organized, unorganized stakeholders? And actually, what happens? So if we say, okay, this is good, we say polycentricity is good, there are drawbacks, because there can be conflicts of levels and so on, but coordination is supposed to overcome it. But what is happening actually? What's the substance of this coordination, cooperation, collaboration and communication that makes the response of polycentric systems working? And so starting with this, we developed a research question, is actually how do the mechanisms of polycentricity sustain crisis response in practice in the communities? Now, what about what mechanisms are we talking about? Crisis management literature emphasizes processes of what should happen between the different responders, and I mean these 4 Cs. But the polycentricity theory, which we derive from the public choice literature, and the starting thinker of polycentricity was Elinor Ostrom. However, the ideas have been developed further. So what is this in the substance of this communication of these 4 Cs? And polycentricity theory lets us derive 3 mechanisms: is facilitation of local knowledge, resource mobilization, and enablement of experimenting and innovation. So with this theoretical setting, I want to now move to the empirical part to understand how do we link Ukraine to the polycentricity theory. Basically, that is because Ukraine has had a decentralization reform, or actually, to be more correct, it was a set of reforms, administrative, political, and fiscal, which were done starting with in April 2014 and more or less completed until 2020 in summer. Administrative meant that there was an amalgamation of about 12,000 small municipalities who were not able to cater for their populations into more viable territorial communities, or hromadas in Ukrainian, and that creates impetus for increasing the efficiency of governance. Political means that it was actually principle of so-called subsidiarity. So when the authority that is closest to the people provides them services and is accountable to them. And Ukraine implemented this by these hromadas. They elect their own mayors and councillors, and they are actually responsible for service provision. So it is the grounds for more legitimacy, because you start building the accountability chain between people and the authorities in these smaller units. And the fiscal, and it's very important. They are not just responsible for public service provision, let's say schools, kindergartens, medical facilities, but they also started to get money that was not dependent on higher levels of governance, but they were just from the personal income tax, the 60% share started to come directly into the budget of local authorities, and shares of a few other taxes, up to some taxes actually with 100%. And it's guaranteed, so it means they have the money. Plus, there was a digital transformation going on, so that's why we we can say that empirically, from this empirics, we can say that Ukraine was moving towards a polycentricity in local governance via the empowered municipalities, because polycentricity means that you have semi-autonomous units that are dealing with issues in their geographical or thematic domain. So we have this. We think about Ukrainian hromadas as such semi-autonomous units in the whole governance system. Now, of course, martial law had its changes. There is no temporarily suspended electoral accountability, direct democracy mechanisms like referendum are possible. There has been a lowering of transparency requirements for the issues of security. And also the state administrations, the state executive, the branches, or basically that means their local and regional branches of the state, let's go on this way, they are they've been established, they've been converted into military administrations, and in some hromadas, instead of local self-government, we have military administrations. Actually, in 13, I believe, in 13% of hromadas, that is connected to the occupation or being close to the hostilities. Still, the system in general is, and the a share of personal income tax, which comes from the military personnel, is now going directly to the state, which is, of course, infringement a bit on the fiscal autonomy as it was planned, but basically many things remain. So we can still say about their relative autonomy. So how we looked, what is the methodology of our study? So on this, our main data collection method was a survey, and on this map you see the 2024 survey distribution of how many municipalities in each region responded. We also so this survey was conducted with the All Ukrainian Association of Local Governments, and also NGO People in Need and the National Network for Resilience and Cohesion. We got 181 responses from the representatives of public officials from local self-government authorities. These are mostly smaller municipalities, 50,000 people or less, and actually mostly rural, but 63% of them are located in the red. Also, we are using previously collected data for some to be able to see some trends. In 2022, we collected 241 responses, and in 2021, 126 responses. This was done together with the Association of Ukrainian Cities and the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe. Plus, in 2022-2024, we did interviews and focus groups. If someone is interested in methodology more detailed, I'll be happy to share. So, what we find now, I will present the findings. Just to remind the question, so we wanted to know how are the different mechanisms of polycentricity help crisis response in the communities. And I will now present what we found about each of the three mechanisms. So the first is facilitation of local knowledge. Here I have to say that we think of process of facilitation of local knowledge as in a different streams. So one is informing. It is only when local authority basically sends the information one way to the citizens. But we also have other levels of participation, of which I will speak later. So at the level of informing, we actually find that going to the slide, we see some interesting trends compared to the time of relative peace in 2021, but also between 2022 and 2024. So first of all, interestingly that local authorities in Ukraine very much keep or make an effort, let's say, to keep the citizens informed. I will speak later about what. Then the entrepreneurs, since 2022, this became very relevant group for Ukrainian municipalities, and they are being, they remain as for informing purposes in 2024 as well. And we also note that internally displaced people, so we unfortunately didn't measure how they involved internally displaced people in 2021 when there was a first wave of displacement because of the Russian annexation of Crimea and their support, some people call Donbass war, so when the Russia-backed separatists were going against the civilians in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. But at least between 22 and 24, we can see the growth in share of our respondents who say that they inform these stakeholder groups. So how do they do it? Actually, social media get at the forefront. This is a tool plus the messengers in social media, which are used by the local authorities to spread official information. Then Lexicon's websites, they also developed chatbots where you can ask certain questions, and they developed digital maps, which they actually, at practice, they actually adapted from pre-2022 situations when they were geomapping anything like schools, medical facilities. So there has been a big wave of geoinformation systems development in Ukraine. So this is just adopted practice. Now, as I mentioned, the next level of how local knowledge is circulating is through consultations. The slides here, they tell a very complex story, but I want to just highlight two things. So first of all, we noticed that local stakeholders become more demanding for consultations after a drop in 2022. So for example, take the blue line, the residents. In 2022, there was apparently a drop in the request of this group. So just a vague group of stakeholders to consult with them. And we know why, right? There was an urgency. We will see in the next slides that residents were very much into co-producing the response to the crisis. They didn't want this consultation, but this is now changing. Also, very similar is with the invitation to consultations. And again, what we find is internally displaced people and entrepreneurs, they are very much the key groups to actively seek consultations. And that is very interesting. So they're what we see with the local self-government invited for consultations, that slide below, we can see between 2022 and 23, the IDPs, the orange line quite grows, and entrepreneurs has grown very much between 21 and 22, although there is a small decline for 2024. So now I want to give some examples what do I mean. So one of the very strong tools that Ukraine has been developing, Ukrainian local authorities, is the IDP councils for the internally displaced people. Here, this is interesting that the practice has been existing in Ukraine before the full-scale invasion. It has been brought up by the stabilization services, NGO, and has been spreading around, but it wasn't mandatory. And in some municipalities already in 2022, once they saw the numbers of people coming in, they started establishing these without waiting for the government to issue a decree to do that. And but indeed, in 2023, the government actually did issue a decree where this is now mandatory. But I just want to highlight that many municipalities were at the forefront. So the institutionalization came later after the practice, I mean, at the national level. So IDP councils are platforms where it's not just who comes in. It's usually NGOs who are either created by IDPs themselves or that they claim to represent the interest of IDPs. There's obviously no objective criteria of who comes in, who comes out. There are questions about it, but with those with whom we spoke, they're trying to really see themselves as a bridge, conveying the message to the municipality authorities about what are the needs of the internally displaced people. And there are logical spaces. It's another level of how facilitation of local knowledge can occur. What we notice here important is the responsiveness to the feedback of residents, but especially entrepreneurs and internally displaced people. So how we interpret, so the feedback is sort of hidden within these two slides, and you have to interpret them together, or the graphs. So when we say local self-government stakeholder regularly exchanged views, pay attention how entrepreneurs have grown between 21 and 22, and also how how IDPs have grown between 22 and 24. Residents, after again a small decline, it's getting up again. So we actually interpret this as increasing demand for democratic consultations after a small decline when there was a feeling of more acute crisis. But with interest in is the responsiveness actually, which comes at the lower graph here. So municipalities claim, at least, that they change their that the argument of these people actually change what they're doing. Especially you could see the big change between 21-22 for the entrepreneurs, quite a big change for IDPs, and relatively large actually for residents between 21 and 22. Here are, empirically we observe different things of it, but one of it is municipalities are very sensitive to resident feedback in social media. So they really read what people say in the groups, and they think, okay, is there something I can do differently? Or I can maybe communicate differently. Sometimes it's about communicating what we already do. Entrepreneurs, we have many examples of how businesses have stepped up to support where there were gaps. From some small initiative, taxi in Novoyarычe community in Lviv, taxi drivers, the taxi companies, they started to do a social taxi, people who were not able to move themselves for quite some mobility issues. But also to big things like, well, I'm sure you all have heard about the Unbroken Center, which is the rehabilitation center in Lviv, connected to the municipal hospital, but also very much supported by the local entrepreneurs, especially IT cluster. So we have this kind of interesting combinations and the role of entrepreneurs. And also I want to notice here, because it's, I will relate it a bit later, the experts. It is in literature, there is a big discussion about the expert knowledge and the so-called tacit knowledge, everyday knowledge of people. And we saw that the experts started to become less relevant in 2022. You see in the both ways, because they're not always there. There is not time maybe to find the right expert, but citizens or anyone who say, okay, I know how to do it, they were just there, they could jump in. And so we, my colleagues and I, we started speaking about democratization of knowledge, that someone who doesn't have an expert label can be helpful. But as things start to get more, there is such a thing as protracted crisis. So human psyche is such that after a certain period of time, it's not a shock anymore, whatever happens, but it's just a constant fighting, constant resilience building measures. And then once they started to become a bit more technical, the expertise starts to be more important. So that's why we have here slight increase in the importance of experts. Here I want to also highlight one interesting example of the democratization of knowledge is a multi-stakeholder dialogue over revitalization after the Russian destruction in Kyiv. It was in the region, in the Kyiv region. And you can see this looks like very nice urban planning workshop. Basically, the municipality wanted to renovate this area, but also get input really of all the people to think about what can we do about social cohesion, because the municipality has suffered a lot, and to incorporate veterans, which is very hard thing to do. We heard from many municipalities that veterans may be reluctant to engage in this kind of participatory processes with the rest of the population. And so the city, the municipality of Makariv reached out to a group of architects who in turn have engaged facilitators, which are knowledgeable in doing urban planning workshops. And they started to make participation very tangible. So you can see all these kind of installations. The project is called Our Place, Наше Місце. And the consultation, actually this, I call it a dialogue platform because it lasted over a year. And as we heard the deputy mayor of Makariv saying, at the end of this, it was completely different to what they came with in terms of what they wanted to do with this space. So the citizens completely changed the initial plan of the authorities. But the second thing he said, and I asked, look, it must have been very frustrating for you, right? Like, well, I wouldn't lie, yes, but it is the type of participation I would not do it differently anymore. Like I want to do all the participation now this way. And what they do, because the facilitators were able to bring in different groups. These groups tried to try their ideas. There have been expert inputs and there have been conflict. And people had to overcome, and conflict was not about the park. The conflict was about much deeper things like social identities, experiences of war and so on. But through this facilitation and the dialogical action and constant openness of the authorities, they were able to at least smoothen some of this. So that is how we, and of course, this links to us also, social cohesion links to societal resilience, and that's why we put it into the crisis response practices. And so that was it for the resource, for the knowledge circulation mechanism. I also want to present here the resource mobilization mechanism. We asked our municipal respondents whether they introduced any information or participation initiatives within the past year from the survey, and if yes, for what purpose. And here we see that resource mobilization is actually very important. So let's look at the graph about the attracting external resources. From the left, we see a huge increase in 2022. We see also, and that is unfortunately our only our only question, which we had measured also in 2021. So compared to the peace times, engagement becomes much more pragmatic. It lets you actually get the resources for the problems on the ground to be solved. But we also see quite high responses for the coordination of supply and demand and meeting the needs of vulnerable social groups. Interestingly, we see a drop from quite high level for the coordination of volunteers. We interpret it this way, that in 2022, local self-government were like sort of hubs. Through them came a lot of information and resources, and people also came to them in order to, and so they had to be directing a bit. But a year after our survey, the NGOs professionalized, the information started to be, didn't have to already go through the local authorities, so the more direct connections established. That's why there is such a drop in responses. Just as an example, we also asked about the co-production. So co-production is a next level of participation when all non-state and state, or let's say non-governmental and governmental stakeholders, bring in resources and knowledge into the same goal. So it is really a higher level of participation. It is not expected from all the participatory opportunities. But here, very interesting. So first, let's look at the graph, and then I'll explain the picture. So we see that the proportion of municipalities who said that they that entrepreneurs and NGOs implemented or coordinated implementation of solutions in 2022 was much, much higher compared to 21. So under normal circumstances, these numbers, which you see in 21, so 24% of NGOs, 11% of businesses, these are actually normal. Like we are not expecting high numbers for this kind of very resource-rich cooperation and from these stakeholders. But then this is basically increasing very much. Plus, we see a significant drop with the gray line with 54% in the beginning shows how many municipalities or proportion who did not involve anyone. You see how much it had dropped. So they had to involve at least someone because they understood they need a network of responders. The responders, they can't be alone. So entrepreneurs become important residents also. These are all these volunteers. What we know very much, and Emma's research is very much showing it, how they are involved. All right, and here I just want to give an example, and pretty normal, we see a slight decline towards 24. So I wouldn't, I saw some research that says, or some that only compares 22 to 24, saying, oh, there is a drop in Ukraine in terms of engagement, there is like a kloof coming between the non-governmental, governmental actors. In my view, the way I interpret this data is that it is not, it's probably coming to normal in a way, because that was very high to start with in 2022. But we can talk about it. And so this example, I also think that this is normal, coming back to normal. This is a photography from the Novovolynsk City Council in the Western Ukraine, provided to me by Serhiy Kornelyuk, with whom I also interviewed him, and he was one of these people who returned from Kyiv, who had a lot of project management experience, and he just came to the city council on day one and said, okay, let's see how I can help. And many people did that, and so these people here is a mix of the city council employees and these kind of volunteers. And they are having here humanitarian headquarters, where they also direct, for example, humanitarian goods from the Western countries to the eastern regions of Ukraine, or to the internal displaced people in the city. Actually, this city got, on day one, they had like, they said about 6,000 people coming in, or the first several days, and it's a 60,000 people municipality. So you can imagine the scale, like 10%. But of course, after a certain time, let's say a couple of months, this was not needed anymore, because processes started to be a bit more, some people left back to where they came from, some more official channels have been organized for humanitarian assistance, and so you don't need this particular cooperation anymore. That's why I think this waning is not telling us a catastrophe at this point. All right, and final mechanism I want to talk about is experimenting and innovation. Here we just want to give an example of the occupied municipalities, occupied armadas. Even though they are occupied, they didn't stop functioning actually, and didn't stop. They started to adapt their service provision to their displaced populations. And for example, they said we asked them, how do you even keep contact to your displaced population? So they run community pages of social media. It's admittedly a one-way channel usually for information or for listening to what people say about their behavior. But also they have a website for their community. Some created a database of community contacts. And this is very interesting because I noticed that some mayors and their communications department reaching out to their residents who are refugees abroad and asking to facilitate intermunicipal cooperation because they're already there, or to any other help. And 55% of those who we interviewed, who surveyed, so we surveyed 20 such displaced municipalities. They said they created physical centers of our community in other communities. some kind of representations. So here on this picture, you see the most, perhaps the most visible example. It's a center called the Mariupol. The city of Mariupol runs it. The management is formed of the former city institute. The head of Mariupol is the city institute head. And they are placed in, I believe, 13, 14 cities in Ukraine. And this is where people from Mariupol can come, ask for assistance with social support, humanitarian support, job search, or other activities. And they also created a hotline. And I must say that this kind of institutional adaptation is we see it really as like a side effect of this kind of autonomy that they used to have, because they had a practice of solving their local problems themselves, not waiting for the other levels of governance. And so that is what they did in their conditions of war. This is not to say they don't cooperate with other levels of governance or that everything is great, but here I'm just highlighting the mechanism of polycentricity. But so all these processes of circulation of knowledge, resource mobilization, and adaptation and innovation, they actually hang on that people engage on both sides, but especially that communities really engage. So we also asked about challenges that local self-government sees in community engagement during the war, and we are able to compare it to same questions we asked in 2021 during relative peace. And what we see, ensuring active citizen participation has become tremendously difficult for our respondents, and so is also ensuring constructive dialogue here at the bottom. Plus, they are very much concerned, just like in peace times, actually, about ensuring the inclusivity of participation. So they know that they are not reaching out to everyone they want to. Plus, there are some other challenges. And we make a conclusion here is that actually war exacerbates the otherwise typical challenges of communication and cooperation with communities. So it is not a special war challenge in a way, but different war experiences, trauma, and displacement make it harder. Obviously, here we had interestingly, a lot of people ask, what about security? So we did a validation workshop with municipalities, and they said, yes, it is definitely a concern, because if you want to have offline participation, you need a protected space, a bomb shelter, and you need to think twice whether you make it public, where you're gathering, and so on, and who is coming. But many, for example, in the city of Kharkiv, they learn to adapt again, and they have digital participation. So per se, the insecurity or lack of security is not always a stopper for participation. But what happens instead is that there can be emotional stress from this kind of participation in general. Plus, we also noticed that they respond. Employees get overloaded and the municipality employees are now even more stretched on their human resources than they had been before the full-scale invasion. So whenever there's even, you need to navigate all these groups, community groups, it gets it's overload on the people who work in the municipality. Plus, there can be a politicization of community issues that comes through the participation. So it just means, before I go to conclusions, it just means that we should not take the polycentricity mechanisms that they would work always in a war, and we shouldn't take them for granted, because it depends on the people, and their resilience, psychological resilience, is not endless. So it helps now to the point, but it's not always. I mean, it's not a resource without boundaries. And to conclude regarding the polycentricity and resilience during the war, so we find that case of Ukraine shows us that having this decentralized, empowered local units is not an obstacle to crisis response. Our data does not allow us to make an explicit test of decentralization reform. However, by describing and showing these mechanisms that it actually works, we can at least contribute that it does not preclude crisis response. But also we find that communities enabled the circulation of local knowledge, mobilized resources, and adapted by experimenting and innovation. So we see that in practice, this polycentricity, which means semi-autonomous centers, sort of governing their own issues, it actually works in practice. Plus, it allows this that communities are so self-sufficient. It allows them to be a bit more creative, and they could involve non-organized, non-state stakeholders to contribute. And as I already mentioned, just want to emphasize that there are limits to polycentric governance because capacity to participate gets reduced because of the war stress, because of the insecurity. And also, of course, where there are already hostilities going on, obviously cannot speak about any kind of participation, although even there, groups of volunteers help evacuate people, for example. But how to support it? I mean, the best way to support Ukraine, as you all obviously know, is to provide the weapons for defense, the air defense, and good security guarantees. But with this particular issue, is about helping municipalities create communication spaces where people can meet each other, so-called third spaces. Actually, in sociology, they used to use this term, and technology that can help communicate better and more protected technology use, like to support municipalities in more protected technology use. That is what support that can be prioritized to make this still work. So thank you very much, and I'm looking for questions forward.
Thank you very much, Oleksandra. So we're now very happy to take questions both from in the room and online. If you're online, you could put your question in the chat. You prefer to do it that way, Sasha?
Yeah, or use a raise hand feature.
Yeah, or you can raise your hand and you can turn on your camera and ask to us. So I'll get us started with the question. Thank you very much for sharing this. I think this is really cool data. I've seen you present on the 2022 surveys, right? So it's really interesting to see the 2024 surveys and see these potentially kind of like emerging patterns. And I just want to also commend you for like the amount of work that it takes to gather this kind of data and probably like mildly harassing municipal workers to respond to surveys during wartime. I don't underestimate just like the data collection that's gone into this. I thought it was interesting, the kind of trend. Maybe it's a little bit early to call it a trend from 2022 to 2024, but what you suggest is this kind of return to normal that we're seeing with the local municipalities. So earlier on, in 2022, they were collaborating with very many different stakeholders, particularly volunteers. You know, this is something I've looked at in my own work. But then you're seeing this kind of return to normal, like when your city isn't surrounded or being flooded with IDPs, you don't necessarily need all hands on deck, right? There's a little bit more normalization here. So as things return to normal, I was wondering if you're also seeing like learning being applied here, right? So like there's not necessarily this collaboration with lots of different volunteer groups and different stakeholders in the same way, but can you see an impact of some of these experiences in the way that these local municipalities are now kind of conducting their business as things return to more normal, quote unquote, knowing that of course there's still a war going on very much so.
Right, so yeah, I want to first really say that this research would not be possible if local authorities didn't take the time to respond, and we really appreciate that they still cooperated with us. So regarding your question on learning, so I just want to maybe qualify or specify, so indeed co-production becomes less, but what becomes more is the demand for democratic participation, so for consultations and so on. So in a way, it is indeed finding kind of normality under the work conditions in a democracy. So with this learning, I definitely can say the IDP councils, for example, or all kinds of entrepreneurial platforms. They are not very institutionalized, but let's say there are very many informal consultation mechanisms with entrepreneurs. And I say informal because they're very, very informal. It's like meeting, I don't know, inviting a mayor to a meeting of local businesses in a, maybe in a cafe. Or so it's really informal. Or municipalities told us they started using, and this, I cannot say when they started, but they have molitownie śniadanki, which is the like prayer breakfast. And also the idea is that people can come there and talk about what burdens them, but it is like a method to get more cohesion in village. We're talking about villages. So that is the learning. I would say first learning that they have is that social cohesion is really important. Maybe because the demand for accountability is growing, and it is a chance that there will be, there are lots of problems with service provision even before the full-scale invasion, but of course during. So there's a reason to complain, which can undermine social cohesion. So one learning is that they know they have to do something about it. So there are IDP programs for IDPs and so on. And I think another learning, which it's just my already interpretation, but because resources in Ukraine are not endless, they need the resources from abroad. So there is a big demand for applying all kinds of European projects. And this is where municipalities also look for support from non-governmental actors like NGOs or universities. For example, KIC and the Alliance of Ukrainian Universities had a very interesting project on capacity building for municipalities to develop a model how a university can work with municipalities. So something like that. So maybe second learning is a bit of a demand for institutionalization, if you want.
Yeah, there's learning, but it's already kind of going to this next step of more formal participation, more like established resource streams and things like that.
Yeah. Maybe because you need some order in the house.
Yeah. Do we have any questions in the room or online? Because I have loads, so I can keep going what people think. Yes, okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I think this is highly relevant research. I was wondering, so the results that you presented were, as I understood, not merely based on the service, but also on the qualitative data that you collected, which also included focus groups, I think you said. Perhaps you could maybe say a little bit more about that. That sounds really interesting, how that went and how you actually also reached the people. And then, as you just mentioned, the kind of foreign third-party funding for municipalities or for like NGOs and civil society organizations. I was also wondering what role they play now, whether you have any data on that, how much funding actually comes from abroad in terms of kind of development support, or also kind of project-wise capacity building or dealing with the past or whatever kind of project that they may be, how visible they are compared to what is happening kind of on a local level or on a national level. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So yes, indeed, we had this is a composition of several data collections. So in 2022, we had a survey of respondents with the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe, and they also were they also set up a focus group consisting of their members, because Ukrainian municipalities are members in the Congress, and there's a delegation, so-called delegation. So we were able to speak with the members of this delegation, which represented local authorities, and there were one or two, I believe, from the regional and and the oblast self-government. Ukraine also has elected representatives at these levels. So that was one focus group, and we also had a focus group in 2022 with educated teachers and education administrators. That was also very interesting because they were part of some other projects to which we had connection, and we were asking them about their adaptations. And it was very interesting to see how teachers use the networks within Ukraine, which they had developed thanks to international capacity building, to send the kids from Chernihiv region to evacuate them somewhere to the central Ukraine. And we also had one focus group with representatives of 4 municipalities that varied on, let's say, how directly affected they were by hostilities. So some were from occupied or nearly occupied municipalities. Some had been occupied but liberated. One was in the western Ukraine, and another one was in the south, which was affected by hostilities but not occupied or liberated after occupation. So here we actually used more or less personal connection. I have in 2022, we tried to keep the maximum variation sample, but I wouldn't say it is like very systematic. And in 2023, everything was online. We had a nice discussion about how to do the focus groups and discussions. So online, I find it more appropriate in these conditions, because that's when people can choose a place which is safer, quote unquote, and leave easier whenever there is a siren. And in 2023, we had, or I was just writing this, basically we had also focus groups with public officials. We had, for example, we did a mini study in the Cherkasy region, where we had actually 2 focus groups with NGOs. So one focus group was with representatives of NGOs who relocated to the Cherkasy region. Another one was those who work on IDP issues, but who are local, who have not been affected directly by displacement. And the third focus group was with IDPs themselves, but let's say they were a bit more active in it. So they didn't have, some had, one woman represented a place of collective living of the municipalities. They MKP, Mesta Kompактного Проживання, for example. So these are like kind of already a bit more active people. Plus, we interviewed the representatives of several smaller towns, and also Cherkasy itself, about, did I say Kyiv School of Cherkasy Oblast? Because that was all in Cherkasy Oblast, sorry. And Cherkasy and we interviewed social departments in several smaller towns and in Cherkasy about their practices. So and I have to say Cherkasy is very special because it is one of these regions which had not been dealing with internal displacement is a big shock since 2014-15. It was new for them in 2022, even though there has been experience in general in Ukraine on this issue. So yeah, here's this long story about our methods, but all online. And regarding the funding, I don't have the numbers top of my head. Of course, it is very important. And what I mean by, of course, so there is streams of funding for the NGOs, and some of these is about helping local self-government. For example, it's about doing some kind of a participatory bomb shelter creation. So of course, they need then to cooperate with local authority. But also what is very important is European infrastructure funding and funds like NEFCO, which work on also infrastructure, housing especially. I've seen some of the projects who do that. Also United Nations, UNDP is visible in this infrastructure work. GATE, You Lead with Europe is a very big project that has supports decentralization reform and a lot of capacity building for different municipal leaders and the authorities. And of course, there is now a big debate about how their recovery funding will go. So the European Union has established a Ukraine facility. It says that 20% of the funding has to go to the municipalities. But it is a big political question at the time how these 20% will be channeled, whether it will be more of a bottom-up approach or a top-down through some centralized fund. And I have a author paper with Roger Myerson where we argue for more bottom-up decentralized funding just to balance the strengthened executive, which has been strengthened because wars strengthened the executive.
Thank you. Do we have any questions in the room or online? I very much encourage those online to put up a hand. I have another question. I'm interested, you mentioned a lot how there's been increasing collaboration and consulting with IDPs and representatives of IDPs. It seems like this is both something that the municipalities are carrying out, so they're approaching these groups, but also these groups are connecting with the municipalities themselves. I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about this, actually, like what this looks like and what kind of things that these groups are advocating for. I think it's very interesting to learn about the ways in which the local municipalities are engaging with these groups and how these groups are advocating for themselves.
Yeah, thank you for this question. So I will speak based on our study with Oleksandra in the Cherkasy region. So even when I presented, it might sound like it's all very smooth, but it's not. So the traditionally critical Ukrainians and Ukrainian civil society usually are unsatisfied with how IDP problems like housing or social support or even in cultural integration are handled at the local level. So very much critique comes along the way of the local authority. But what also Ukrainian civil society has learned, and it's pretty unique, they not just criticize, but there are organizations who come and offer support. So one way of doing it is this establishment of IDP councils. And we spoke with a relocated organization from Mariupol. So they have themselves IDP experience, plus they advocate for the needs of IDP. So they come to these meetings and they channel things like, you know, housing conditions are suboptimal, or because especially in the first, let's say 6 months or so, many municipalities just freed their schools for the housing of people. So let's say that was February, and there was for many, and it's in our survey, for many, they felt like in 6 months, everything will be done. So summer, spring, then summer, and then from September 1, children can go to the schools. And when the children had to go to the schools, they faced this problem of where do we place the people? So this is a big aspect of concern. So these organizations, plus there are organizations who specifically target cultural and social integration, because you don't want to make it sound like there is so in Ukraine, there is a bit of misunderstanding that if people come from the East, it's like a different culture. It's not a different culture, but it is not a local culture to that municipality. So in order for these people not to be looked up as foreign, there needs to be some kind of activity. So there are NGOs who do that, and they may offer it to the municipality. They may ask municipality for a place, for example. So some of the productive cooperations happen when a municipality provides a space for free, or like for 1 hryvnia, for these activities, and then the NGO finds money from donors for their for fixing it, making it look nice. And then there are activities happening that are partially initiated by the, let's say, culture department of the municipality and partially by this NGO. So that is also how they cooperate. Also, some organizations, it is an example of already co-production. In the relocated NGO helped a very small Western municipality to apply for additional project funding, for example, because NGOs often have this knowledge of fundraising. And so there are many cases and not to mention, many municipalities employ the IDPs because, and that is mayor of Kopychin was just in Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute telling how they employed a doctor and I think someone into the sports or school, I don't want to lie, from somewhere from one of the occupied territories of Ukraine, because smaller municipalities don't have these people. And now they're there and they're really like jumping out of themselves to be able to employ them.
They have this, for want of a better word, like human capital now in these kind of.
Yeah.
I think this is really interesting because I think often IDPs are seen as like victims of the situation, and sometimes they're viewed as a group that don't necessarily have a great deal of agency. But I think it's very interesting how they're advocating for themselves and they're putting pressure on their local authorities, and their local authorities are engaging with this and learning from this. Actually, I think that's very interesting. It's a nice example of how this this polycentric form of governance can really facilitate the agency and the activity of the groups that might be seen as more marginalized sometimes.
Yeah, just to, I don't want to interrupt, but I just want to say, of course, this participation is not every IDP.
Yeah, and it's not
right?
all sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
no, and also some, I had a class of representatives of municipalities, and they said, look, but we have ex IDPs, and we ask them, oh, we try to engage them, and no one is engaged. They just want to get their social aid or just want to live their life.
Yeah.
I mean, we should respect that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, we have a question at the back.
I'm wondering how the use of technology has changed from 2021, 22 to 24, and how that may explain the changes in the indicators you've spoken about, maybe participation rates in certain categories. And perhaps if any of the groups are using the AI, for example, to make their to meet their objectives.
Yeah, great question. So I think we see in all our surveys that digital technology means mobile phones or like social media, and they are important channels of communication, and this actually primary channel. Messenger is also a primary channel, and this just got bigger with the full-scale invasion. So more communication happens in WhatsApp groups. Also, official decision-making happens in WhatsApp groups. That actually raises the issues of cybersecurity. And we find in our surveys that unfortunately only about 30% of our respondents, at least, they have some kind of cybersecurity measures. Many don't have the relevant capacity to protect their digital environments from attacks. Regarding we don't have data to say whether the technology diminishes or increases the participation rates, I have to say. But even in 2021, we know that some municipalities tried, even though they use digital tools, for example, for participatory budgeting, voting, there was an online platform where you could vote. Still, some organized at the administrative service center the opportunity to cast your vote, because not everyone is digitally savvy, and there is a digital divide in terms of age. So more senior people are less digitized, and that's an issue. I know that in some, it was in Kharkiv, I believe, that volunteers organize digitally to help or inform the elderly elderly neighbors about something like, or to bring them food, or to inform them about some, some radical or extreme events, whatever happens. So there is parts of society who are thinking about this digital divide. Now about AI, everyone talks about it. There is, we can see that some parts of population in Ukraine are trying to use it, students especially.
Creating their own set of challenges.
Yes, yeah, exactly. There are courses for, AI for project managers. Also, my university, Kyiv School of Economics, develops this kind of courses, how to use it smartly. But I don't see it, and also innovative startups, for example, demining startups apparently using some of the AI technology. But I don't see so far very big and general uptake in the municipalities. So they're not there yet.
I'm gonna do the mean thing of asking you a question about something which we didn't talk about.
Okay.
But something that I'm interested in, I think you will have more insight in than other folks. So I'm really interested in the potential role of these local authorities in the reconstruction and rebuilding of Ukraine. Obviously, the war is still going on. We don't know when it's going to end, but there's already some discussion and planning starting, right, about how to rebuild Ukraine, which things to prioritize. And it seems to me like local authorities have a lot of potential via this kind of polycentric governance you're talking about to really elicit the views of a variety of stakeholders and try and think about reconstruction in local areas in a way that's taking into account the views of the local population, let's just say that. So I just wondered if, again, I realize your research is about something adjacent to this. Do you see a role for local authorities in engaging with it? Are you seeing them thinking about it? Are you seeing the central government thinking about how to really leverage these skills and these capacities, or is the situation a little bit more depressing?
Oh, I mean, there's nothing more depressing than war.
Yeah.
So,
But I mean, in terms of like, is the local government, do you think they're ready to take advantage of this capacity in the local authorities, or do you think it's something that's going to be really like very top down?
So yeah, I will give a twofold answer, because there has been a lot of discussion about reconstruction and the role of local authorities in the reconstruction. For example, in the last year's Ukraine Recovery Conference. So the high-level politicians, not just in Ukraine, but also abroad, declare commitment to make sure that the Ukrainian local authorities are reasonably and meaningfully involved in the planning of reconstruction. So some political commitment is there. We also see that, for example, European Parliament has really strongly pushed to make sure that the Ukraine facility identifies this 20%. Like this, that didn't come like this. So it was a political debate that they had to happen in Brussels and between Brussels and Kyiv, for sure. Now, so the narrative of political commitment is there. Now, regarding the implementation, it gets a bit more complicated, because some reasons concern the capacity of different types of municipalities to really plan their recovery. If we're talking about very small municipalities, there may be some people left, there may be not enough even the planners, engineers, and so on. So it gets very complicated for them. So that's why the previous Ministry for Recovery, which is now the Ministry for Regional Development again, they have decided to establish the Agency for the Recovery and Reconstruction, which had 6 pilots about how the state, the central authority, can help municipalities to rebuild. There have been mixed results, and actually so far none of this project is yet finished, because they started like last year. I don't know what will be their fate. Now, when we come to planning of the political inclusion. So we are already in the realm of politics. And our survey, which we also conducted within this survey, shows that even though the communication between the higher levels of government, the central government and the regional administration, the municipalities, is perceived as more or less satisfactory, but it's communication. But when it comes to involvement of municipalities in the strategic decision making, many feel like they have no influence, even if there is some kind of consultation. So there is definitely a demand for setting a more strategic and more maybe transparent platform for negotiations, how how the municipalities will be involved, because in the end it all comes down to who will be responsible for the money that will be coming from, for example, from the EU Ukraine facility. Now, and that is hard, let's say, and there needs to be, there are some ideas because there is the FERA, the format, the FERA State Regional Development Fund. So far, one of the ideas was to channel money through it. It has its own pros, it has own benefits, but also has own risks. But now if we look, so this was like this big picture. But now we look at the municipalities, here the polycentricity comes into play. So some municipalities don't wait for the decisions at the upper levels, and they are very active in having applications to the infrastructure funds, whatever is available. For example, Interreg Europe is a very big European Union funding pot. It is available not for all municipalities, but for more like bordering the countries that are within the EU. But still, there are many more others. And for example, there's a European Bauhaus initiative, which can also help. And so the polycentricity actually allows the municipalities, it creates pressures for competition. And those who understand it, they are just trying to be the first to jump directly to the European pots without waiting for things. And it doesn't depend even on the size of a municipality. So Gold in Kupičinci, again, it's a 16,000 people municipality, but they write projects, they apply, they try to go to different fora internationally, also because they have internally displaced people they have to deal. And actually that mayor was sitting like this in an event at Huri and saying, look, but competition is good because it makes mayors drive. And let's say if they had not this responsibility, if they only were limited by the district or regional authorities, then it would downplay this competition. Doesn't mean that everyone does it and steps, but that's why I have and transnational municipal partnerships. What also happens is that they're trying to establish those because it's a way you can apply together for different funding.
This is where like a city in Ukraine and a city in like Poland or Czech Republic or something would form a partnership, right?
Yeah. In countries, for example, Germany has committed to facilitate that at least one Ukrainian municipality has a partner until the next URC, which is this spring in the
Ukraine Recovery Fund.
But
wow.
I'm not sure how this will work, but they're working hard. So Germany facilitated so far about 230 partnerships. So it means 230 municipalities in Ukraine got a partner in Germany. They are coming with different level of commitment, obviously, but also I see Sweden is very active, and Swedish government gave money now to the Swedish Association of Local Authorities to facilitate these partnerships. And I already see that Norway is very much looking at its neighbor and thinking, maybe we have some
competition between between the Scandinavian states as well.
So,
that's super interesting. So this kind of polycentric, more like local level approach is also facilitating these local authorities to start making moves towards reconstruction and rebuilding themselves without necessarily having to wait for these broader kind of top-down initiatives. That's the next research project, I guess, after this one.
I'm sure a lot of good people already working on this.
That's great. Well, I think if we have no more questions, then that's maybe a good and a somewhat optimistic point to end on. We do have a little bit more time, so I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to add, Oleksandra, or anything we haven't talked about. Oh, just wanted to give the opportunity for the last few to have the last word.
Well, I would say that we should remember that about the polycentricity is also related to democracy, because with creating these local self-governments who are more or less semi-autonomous, obviously that it's not federalism, but they are more or less semi-autonomous to take care of their regions. It is also a system that balances the centralization tendencies which are natural in the war. That's why whenever we're talking about even recovery, construction, channeling funding, this is very important, that there has to be a decentralization element, even if capacity to absorb it of Ukrainian municipalities will rise. But it shouldn't be a way to just not give, shouldn't be a reason to not give them the money. It should be a reason to think, how can we give them the money and support their capacity to absorb it. And there are tools to do this. For example, inter-municipal cooperation within Ukraine. There are at least 4 models how this can be done, so that they can share governance of some facility, for example. It is very hard because cooperation in a polycentric system is actually hard because everyone is competing, right? But if there are facilitators from outside the system or even inside the system, actually, who put them all in the same table and say, guys, okay, here's the pot, we give you the money, but you have to make sure that you establish this cooperative system in which looks after it, because let's be honest, you're maybe too small to manage this particular hospital alone, right? And in this way, it should hopefully work. So municipalities are working on intermunicipal cooperation within Ukraine. There are already initiatives like this. But yeah, I just want you to leave the audience with this message that reconstruction, so efficiency is very important, obviously, but it has to be juxtaposed to the questions of democratization also, or at least we're not talking about democratization, but at least keeping the democracy and not centralizing the whole system further. And thank you very much for having me today at the Jordan Center.
Thank you very much, Oleksandra. Thank you everyone for joining us here in Surrey, New York, and online, hopefully somewhere warmer. Thank you.